Welcome to How Do They Afford That, the podcast that peeks into the financial lives of everyday Australians. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm a writer and co-host of the Fear and Greed Business Podcast. And as always, I'm with Canna Campbell, financial planner and the founder of Sugar Mama TV, which is the financial literacy platform covering YouTube and podcasts and books and Instagram and more. I don't think I've ever stumbled, Canna, over the word financial literacy platform. We've been doing this for quite some time now, and I've never tripped up at that point. Today was the first day.
You're a pro. Well, until now.
I was a pro up until about 20 seconds ago. How are you going?
I'm great, actually, and I have to tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
I read your book.
Oh, you finished it?
I finished it. Now, I am a painfully slow reader. I have to read every single word, and I get very emotionally involved.
Excellent.
And I went to a wedding in Queenstown, so I took the book with me because I thought no one's going to disturb me on the flight. I can just sit and read. And I bawled my eyes out. I may have been a little bit emotional at the time. And Tom woke up and he's like, what's happened? What's wrong? And I was crying so much that I was hyperventilating and couldn't actually get the words out to explain why I was crying. It is so good. And I know I said it's brilliant, but I didn't give it justice. Your words are brilliant, but it is a beautiful book. And just when I thought I'd finished sobbing everything in my body and it was like a shriveled prune, I then read your acknowledgements and started crying all over.
Oh my goodness.
Again. It's so good. It's so good.
Thank you so much. And it's called How to Be Remembered. It came out a few weeks back now, and it's available anywhere you buy books, online, all that kind of thing. And the premise of it is basically that it's just a young guy who every year on the same day, every year, everyone who knows him forgets that he exists. And so he's just trying to go through life and have a relationship and have a job and all this kind of stuff, the things that would just be normal for us, really. And it's not normal for him. And it is quite a battle to try and achieve any of those things because everyone, his family and friends and colleagues, forget who he is on the same day every year. So I'm sorry I made you cry. Actually, I'm not that sorry. I just...
it was a cathartic experience. It was beautiful.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for reading it and thank you for the feedback. I don't know how I feel about making someone cry. I think it's actually a good thing.
I think so. Like you've touched people and it's like, you don't take offense to this, but I'd see this as a compliment. But to me, it felt like a cross between Benjamin Button and Sliding Doors.
Yeah.
Is that,
Yep.
you offended by that?
No, God, no. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, and I like the fact that you picked two films because obviously the book has been optioned for a film. So who knows? Maybe one day we could see it up on the big screen.
I hope so.
Fantastic. Thank you. We've spent a lot of time talking about me and my book, so I very much appreciate that. Today is a topic that I know you're very passionate about.
Aggressively passionate about.
That actually sounds quite intimidating. I'm going to be honest.
I'm going to get fired up.
I'm glad that there is a safe distance between us in the studio. It feels like this comes with a degree of personal risk. We are talking about HECS debt. When I left uni, which was 2006, so a while ago now, I left with a HECS debt. It wasn't a huge one because obviously journalism wasn't as expensive a course as, say, kind of medicine or law or something along those lines. But it was still a debt that I had to pay off over time. And there's been a huge amount of talk about HECS debts lately because these debts are tied to inflation, and inflation, of course, has been soaring. So today we're taking a look at not just the options available when you have a HECS debt, but also whether we need to change the way we approach it, the way we think about it, and the way that it is actually managed basically as a society. Before we get into it, we should mention, of course, that as you're listening, everything that we are talking about is general in nature. It's always general. It's never personal, investment, strategic, or product advice. It is purely for financial education purposes only, which is something, particularly in this case, you are very passionate about making sure people are educated.
Absolutely. We don't know anything about what your financial situation looks like, your goals, your deadlines for those goals, or even your risk profile. So always go and see a financial planner when you have a question about what to do about your own financial future.
Why are you so worked up about this one? Worked up makes it sound like you're actually kind of a bit...
I am. And I now finally feel a little bit of vindication.
Really?
Yeah.
What? So this is clearly something that you've been passionate about then for some time.
Yes.
Okay.
So my YouTube channel, Sugar Mama TV, has been going for about 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been vocal about HEX debt and that it is a form of debt and the rules and regulations could change at any time. And the bigger the debt is, the harder it is to pay off. And I got smashed with people saying, that's the worst advice ever. All these other financial experts with similar qualifications as myself have always said that, your HEX help debt is the cheapest debt you'll ever have. You never need to worry about it. Don't even bother trying to pay it off. Just let it, keep going, kick that can down the road, so to speak. Now, I'm not disrespecting my colleagues in any way whatsoever, and I think it's really healthy to have a variety of different opinions when it comes to different financial strategies, because it means that you're getting, I guess, a really different look from many different angles as to what might be right for you, and you just walk out with more knowledge and more information and greater insight as to different things you can do. However, my stance has never changed. I really dug my feet in and said, no, the rules could change. Yes, it is an indexation, but that still is a cost to have that loan in your life. And don't get me wrong, investing in education is one of the best investments you can ever make for yourself, but it is a debt. And so I've always taken the approach of, obviously you need to honor the toxic debt first, like the credit cards, the personal loans, car loans, but having some type of repayment plan in place towards your HEX debt or help debt may be worthwhile for some people, because obviously the smaller that debt is, the quicker it gets out of your life, frees up your cash flow, and you can go on to building wealth and having emergency savings and so forth. Now, I got really attacked by people and I stood my ground. And lo and behold, the tide has changed. And now we can see who's been swimming naked. And that general advice, whilst it was not intended to mislead anyone, has potentially put people in, I wouldn't say challenging, but situations that they may not have wished they were in had they had known the consequences and impact of HEX debt in your life.
So is this all then because of that indexation rate, which is kind of typically hovered around the 2% mark, going to 3.9%, I think it was last year, and then potentially up to kind of 7-ish% this year, which is a huge jump.
It's gigantic. And, for people who are students, that's a lot of stress and debt in their lives. But if they've been told, and I guess my biggest issue is the lack of transparency, information, education around HEX debt, rather than probably the advice necessarily. But trying to pay something off now at a 7% interest rate is obviously a lot harder. And I do wonder, now that people are seeing these indexation rates apply to their HEX debt and seeing themselves get deeper and deeper into debt, depending on whether they've actually had repayment plans in place or minimum repayment plans, I do wonder how many people wish they could go back in time and have made some extra repayments in the past so that their debt wasn't as big when these bigger indexation rates applied.
Okay, so you said that one of the main issues here is kind of the lack of transparency, the lack of understanding, I suppose, about the way HEX debt actually works. So let's kind of unpack that whole thing. What exactly is HEX debt? How does it work?
All right, so it's a scheme to support eligible students to pay for their education through a loan. And once you start earning about just over $48,000 a year, you will have your employer start taking money out of your pay, which is after tax pay, to help knock down that debt. Now, at the 1st of June, the amount you owe gets indexed. So if these predictions are right, people's debt is going to go up by about just over 7% potentially. So for simplicity, if you owed around about $24,000, which is actually around about the average amount of HEX debt, you'll see your HEX jump by up to $25,700. So you're almost $1,700 deeper into debt.
That is a big jump. And one thing that I mean, having been through the system myself, one thing that you hear kind of mentioned a lot is that this is an interest-free loan.
And this is my big issue. It's not technically an interest-free loan because there is a cost to you. It's an impact on your financial well-being. You are going deeper into debt every time that indexation rate is applied to your HECS debt. So I just feel that we need to maybe change the wording behind this so that people understand this is a loan. It does have a financial cost to you to have this loan in your life. And this is not to tell people to run out and sell the clothes off their back to go pay down their HECS debt. Yeah. That's not the case at all. It's about being educated, informed, and understanding where this debt operates in your wealth creation journey so that you know and understand when is the best time to look at paying it down if that's something that you want to do.
So it feels like it's essentially kind of interest by another name. And I think you're absolutely right. There is not enough understanding about that. And I suppose there's probably a bit of complacency because that indexation rate has been low for so long that people don't realise, much like your home loan in a way, that kind of people got used to paying such low rates for their home loan that didn't kind of realise that, hey, things change over time. And now we've seen so many people get hit very, very hard. And unfortunately, a lot of people that haven't kind of planned ahead for those changes to come. And HECS is just another cost that is actually kind of being hit by that rising cost of living as inflation has soared.
Exactly. And if you think about it, a lot of people who have HECS debt may also have other debts in their lives. So they also might have a home loan or a car loan. So not only are they now having to juggle a significant increase in debt for their HECS debt, they've also got to manage the increase in interest rates for all the other financial responsibilities in their lives, the home loans, the car loans, the investment loans even. So it's a big problem and it needs a complete overhaul.
I was reading that it's taking almost 10 years now for the average HECS debt to be repaid, and that's actually getting longer. Now, obviously, unsurprisingly, when it's kind of increasing by the amount that it is at the moment, that it is taking now longer. It's a fairly long time to be saddled with a debt that many people have been told in the past just to forget about.
Exactly. I wonder how many people regret that. And if you now think about it, your HECS debt is now more expensive than your home loan when it comes to comparing interest rates.
Wow. Speaking of home loans, what is the impact of having a HECS debt kind of sitting there attached to your name? Does it make it... We talked a lot about credit scores and things in our last episode. Does having a HECS debt sitting there make it harder to get a loan?
Great question. So your HECS debt does not go towards your credit score. However, it does impact your ability to borrow money from the bank because it impacts your overall serviceability. So when you submit an application, if you have HECS debt, even if you lie on the application and say that you don't have HECS debt, the bank can still see it and they will see that you actually have outstanding HECS debt and that they need to factor in those repayments that your employer is taking out of your after-tax pay to then obviously be able to afford to service the potential new mortgage.
Would people really lie about that kind of thing? 'Cause surely that's got to be a pretty dopey thing to do, considering this is essentially a government debt. It's all kind of connected. It's not something that you can just hide away.
Well, let me tell you a story. I was meeting with this lovely young couple and doing some initial financial planning work for them. And we went through all their, financial goals and risk profiles. And towards the end, we got to their HECS debt. And one owed about $80,000. The other one owed about $90,000. And it wasn't towards the end that we got to this. And they had these amazing ambitions of buying a home next year and wanting to actually go back to university and do some more courses, which are probably going to increase their HECS debt even further. Now, at that stage, I hit pause and said, you've got to go and see the bank and look at your serviceability first because these are big HECS debts. You're wanting to borrow money with these HECS debts in place. You need to see actually how much you can afford to borrow and if it really will mean that you can afford your dream home. Now, this lovely young couple came back to me with their tails between their legs and said, look, we had the conversation with the bank. It was actually quite incredible how much our serviceability has reduced. What we're going to do is maybe focus on paying some of that HECS debt down first before we buy a home. Now, the other concerning thing was they have a huge amount of HECS debt. And they were both of them are looking at returning back to study again. So their HECS debts were going to go even higher. And they said to me, we really wish someone had told us about the importance of HECS debt and how it impacts our financial wealth creation strategy and all the goals and dreams that we have in place, because it's put the brakes on everything for them.
Okay, we'll come back in a moment. I want to talk to you about kind of some of those other strategies in terms of making additional payments and kind of planning out how you're going to do it rather than just forgetting about it and letting it take care of itself once your income passes that threshold. Because clearly there are other things that you should be considering. Also want to talk to you about kind of whether the system is fit for purpose, kind of whether it actually needs to evolve and how we kind of change the messaging around this, because clearly the messaging is wrong if there's this perception of it being an interest-free loan that just kind of sits there and you don't need to worry about it. And now people are finding themselves in a bit of strife that maybe it does need a bit of work. All right, we'll come back in a moment. Kana, we're talking about HECS debts and the debt basically that a lot of students leave, say, university with, and it typically doesn't start getting paid off automatically until you reach a certain threshold in your income, which I believe is at about $48,000. And look, it probably also needs to be said that we are lucky, right, to have a scheme in place that allows people to go to university and to study and to be able to cover their costs in this way.
It's a huge privilege.
Yeah, because the US system seems very, very expensive and requires a huge amount of kind of a personal investment of money upfront in a lot of cases.
And those people who do have to pay the, $250,000 US educational costs, they're going into the workforce to being a slave to that debt for the next 10, 15 years, when you should really be jumping into the workforce ready to embrace life and the journey and adventure ahead of you and getting ahead financially.
Yeah, so we are fortunate to have a system in place, but it's just about making sure that it works for you and that the information around it is perhaps a little bit clearer.
Yes.
So can you make additional payments off your HECS, assuming that you have left uni and now you're working, perhaps you've passed that threshold and payments are starting to come off automatically. But even if you're not, I suppose, can you start kind of paying it off in advance if you wanted to?
Absolutely. You can make ad hoc or regular repayments to your HECS debt, but you do need to be careful with this because there's no redraw facility. So say, for example, I owe $50,000 in HECS debt and I transfer $1,000 to it. And then the next week I realize, actually, I need that $1,000 back. I can't get it back. So if you are going to make extra repayments, understand that that is going towards the debt and you're not going to get that money back. So make sure you have enough emergency money set aside.
Where does it fit in terms of the debt scale? I don't think that's the term.
The list of priorities.
The list of priorities. That's a good one. So it's certainly not as bad as, say, credit cards, because there is a value attached to what this is paid for, which is your education, which is a fantastic investment that you can make in yourself. But where should it kind of fit in terms of the debt
priorities?
Oh, you said it a minute ago and It just went in one ear and out the other. The debt priorities.
Look, I would say credit card debt first. Get rid of that as a priority. And then obviously personal loans and car loans, making sure you have enough emergency money.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it works for you to have a repayment plan in place. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go hell for leather and pay off that HECS debt as quickly as possible. By all means, do so if that's what's important to you. But even if you can look at your HECS debt and go, well, at the rate my employer is taking money out of my pay, it's going to take 10 years to pay this debt off. That's not good enough for me. Perhaps you can look at cutting that period of time down to 5 years from 10 years. Or perhaps you can do ad hoc irregular repayments if and when you can, or something on a regular savings plan to do sweeps across to that debt when it suits you. But it's about understanding the immediate and long-term consequences of this debt.
How much does the system need to change then? Is it about just the education?
I think a lot of it is about the education, the transparency, the wording that is used. the previous advice from financial experts that never need to worry about it was a very short-sighted advice. So we need to look at the languages. And also another thing that a lot of people haven't spoken about, and I've read many, many stories about this, but women who have got HECS debt and have stepped out of the workforce to raise a family, and they may have not even actually stepped out completely. They may have gone down to part-time work and they're now no longer earning as much as the $48,000 threshold. They no longer have HECS debt repayments coming out. So someone might be out of the workforce, say, 10 years to, say, raise a large family of young children. Each year, their HECS debt is compounding and getting bigger and bigger because the new index rate has been applied. So last year it was 3.9%, this year potentially 7.1%. Can't remember what the interest rate was the previous year. So I read stories of women who had logged into their MyGov account and almost had a heart attack seeing that their, $12,000 worth of HECS debt from 10 years ago is now something like $27,000.
Oh my God.
And they had no idea about this, the consequences of this. So there needs to be a lot of education for people to understand if you stop work, you still have this HECS debt. And maybe there needs to be a policy that comes out that allows people that are on, say, maternity leave or paternity leave to be able to maybe freeze the indexation or something like that. Because we already know about the superannuation gap and the salary gap. We've now got a serious HECS debt issue gap for women.
Which is something that's just not talked about.
I know. And I wrote a story actually, I contributed towards a story for The Guardian, and I got a really nasty email from an economist saying that I was telling people that everyone must prioritise paying off their HECS debt. And it was a fear-mongering article. Not the case at all. Investing in your education is one of the best investments you'll ever make. But it needs to be like every single financial product we consider using or do use, we need to understand exactly what we're getting ourselves into so that we can handle and manage every single financial product to our financial well-being, whether it be a credit card, a savings account, a share portfolio, or a superannuation one. This is another financial product.
So first step, we're running out of time now, but the first step is basically to inform yourself.
Yes.
So probably to actually just log in to your MyGov account and just see what your debt is.
Yes.
It's a good starting point. What next?
Build some goals around that. Look at your budget. Look at what you can afford to do, even if it's $20 per week.
Mm-hmm.
That is $1,000 a year that can help bring down your debt. So that's something that potentially could help you feel like you're a little bit more on top of your HECS debt, and obviously will reduce the impact of next year's indexation. Also, making sure that you speak to your employer about maybe other things you can do to try and increase or improve the amount of repayments you're putting towards your HECS debt. Looking at your living expenses, what you can cut down. All those different things really do add up and make a difference. And stay on top of it so that you're always informed as to how much exactly you owe. But you don't need to panic as such, because I think there's about $74.3 billion worth of HECS debt out there. But it is definitely something you need to understand the consequences, particularly if you're planning on taking time off to raise a family.
And talk to a financial planner.
Exactly.
Someone who can advise you, give you professional advice tailored to your circumstances and really kind of help you through that. Because if you've got questions about this, and particularly if you're one of those people that has the $80 or $90 or $100,000 in HECS debt, that's a fairly substantial sum, and it's something that you want to be taking pretty seriously.
Absolutely, particularly if you're intending to return back to university and further your studies. And my number one best advice to anyone that has got HECS debts and wants to pay it off, the moment you are HECS debt free, those repayments that your employer was previously taking out of your pay, make sure you now use them to build your wealth. Set up a regular savings plan, set up an investment portfolio, start saving for your first home, because you've gone without those repayments or cash flow for so many years as you've been getting debt free. You can now use this to actually support and, I guess, magnify your financial future going forward.
All right. This is something that you're clearly very, very passionate about, and with good reason. Because I don't think there is a lot of understanding about some of the, not even complications, but just the reality of the system. Because, as we discussed, it is fantastic that there is a system that allows Australians to attend university, to be educated, to invest in their education. But there needs to be a greater awareness of the fact that this is not essentially just an interest-free loan as it's been described for so long, and it's something that you can just forget about, that you need to be aware of it. You need to be aware of the indexation rate, which has climbed over the last couple of years and will do so again this year, and that is actually going to cause your debt to continue to grow. So be aware of that and acknowledge that it is real debt, that it is actually debt that is attached to you and to your name, and that is going to probably be taken into account for the serviceability of a loan. Should you be looking for one, consider some of the strategies that are available to you in terms of potentially making additional payments off your HECS, just being aware, logging in, seeing how much you actually owe, figuring out how long that's going to actually take to pay off, and just changing your mindset around it, that it is not just an interest-free loan that can be forgotten about and be paid off automatically once you pass that threshold of salary. And talk about it as well. Talk about it to your employer, about kind of the repayments that you want to come out. Talk about it to a financial advisor, a financial planner, someone who can give you kind of tailored advice to your specific circumstances. But just remember that it is actually a debt, and that it is not necessarily interest-free, and it doesn't just kind of just sit there until it goes away, because with indexation, it can just continue rising. Accurate summary?
I think that's outstanding. And the only other tiny thing I would chime in, which I should have probably put further into this episode, is stay informed. The rules and regulations may change. So be ahead of the game and be prepared in case they do decide to change the terms and conditions.
Yeah, very good point. I have learnt a lot this episode. Where can people find you if they want more information?
Well, there is Sugar Mama's Fireplay podcast, which is every Monday morning at 5 a.m. And then there's my Instagram account at Sugar Mama TV.
And you can hear me every day with Sean Aylmer on Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business news podcast. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, my book, How to Be Remembered, is out now wherever you buy books. Thank you for listening to How Do They Afford That? Remember to hit follow on the podcast. We've been getting some fantastic reviews lately, so thank you very much if you've been one of those people who has left us a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere that you're listening to this podcast. Next week, we are talking about insurance. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. We're getting back into it tomorrow because there is so much more to discuss, particularly life insurance and a few other things that you really need to be aware of, because it is a way of essentially protecting the wealth or protecting the financial independence that you may have built over some time. It is going to be a good one. Don't miss it.